Hello and welcome along to another episode of In Conservation With. My name is David Lindo. I'm also known as the Urban Birder, and tonight, this afternoon, this morning, I'm really pleased to have a guest who I've known about, but in fact, I didn't realize I'd met, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But let me introduce you to, let me see if I can pronounce your name properly. Barend Maden.
Close enough.
um, and Barend is a guy that, as I said, I think I've only met once. I don't know if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, once. We met once in London.
That's right, we met once in London. I thought we met in Serbia, but actually it was to do with Serbia, but it was in London. So we met them once, but we actually, once you meet the once, that's all you need to know really, because life takes over and you become good friends, even though you've met the once. That's all I say. And before we actually talk about you, Barend, should I say? Let me just quickly say thank you to our sponsors, and they are Leica Sports Optics and CJ Wildlife, who are a team of passionate nature lovers and experts in garden wildlife, and they're on a mission to make nature accessible for all. Whether you are a nature novice or a garden guru, they want to inspire, educate, and provide the right tools to help wildlife thrive right on your doorstep. So that's them. And let me talk about Barend quickly. He is a guy who currently works with BirdLife International as part of the BirdLife International partnership. I believe you work with BirdLife International Netherlands, is that correct?
No, actually, I used to work for BirdLife in the Netherlands, but now I'm with the BirdLife Global Secretariat.
Great. Well, there you go. And you are, deeply involved with migration, with the flyways of the world. In fact, your title, as far as I'm aware, forgive me if I'm wrong here, but you're the coordinator of BirdLife's Flyways program. So that is correct, isn't it? Good.
That's correct.
Good. Now, we've met before. Can you remind me? Because actually, when we spoke initially, I actually completely forgot that we've met.
So much for making a good first impression. Actually, we spoke about urban birds. So we were at some award ceremony for the Serbian BirdLife partner. And in the sideline, we talked about how to protect birds in urban environments. That's sort of what we talked about. We didn't touch on migratory birds, but of course they also occur in urban areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One question I didn't ask you right at the very top was, how are you and where are you, Barend?
I'm very fine. I'm in the Netherlands at the moment.
Can you be more specific?
In Arnhem.
Okay, makes no difference to me actually.
It's a small country. It's to the east, in the middle, sort of, close to Germany.
Absolutely. Migration, we're going to talk about it now, but it's such an interesting subject, and a subject that I've been talking about a lot recently because I've been asked questions by various people that I've been taken out on trips. I've been, for example, leading some tours in Hyde Park in London recently, and everyone is standing there thinking, or being spellbound by the stories about migration. They kind of think that it's just swallows ahead from one place to another, but of course, migration is a massive subject which we are still learning about, and of course there's lots of things that you're going to be telling us that we can actually ponder on too. I think the best thing is, Barend, is that you actually start your little presentation, because then I won't be asking you questions that you may be covering within your talk.
Okay, I'll share my screen.
Yeah, and as Barend does that, don't forget that put yourself on speaker view, and you'll be able to see the whole page of his presentation as a whole page, as opposed to being, a tiny square in a bunch of boxes. And I'll give top marks for anyone to identify the 3 species of birds behind him. maybe that could be our ongoing competition during this particular session. Can you name the 3 species of birds in Barend's background? And I'll give you a clue. 2 of them are cormorants. 2 of them are species of cormorants, and then there's another one a little bit more cryptic. You have to look for it. It's not small, but you can see it if you look carefully. What do you think it is? And I'm sure
Um,
we can work out a prize at some point. Are you having trouble?
I'm having a bit of trouble. Oh,
Oh, I know why you're having trouble, actually. Let me untrouble you for a second. And it's because we had a little issue previously. Oh, actually, no, you are co-host, so it should be working. I'll tell you what, don't worry, we'll do it my end. I think it's probably best. Oh,
I think I'm here. I'm here. I'm in.
okay, good. This is the wonders of live Zooms, folks. You know, it all goes
Okay.
well in rehearsals, but then when you actually do it live. Anyway, I'll leave it to you.
Are you seeing my screen correctly?
We see the whole screen full. But
Okay.
we've got the bottom of your screen with your PowerPoint
Oh,
bit at the bottom. But anyway.
I don't know how to change that. Sorry. Good afternoon, evening, morning, everyone. My name is Barend van Gemerden. I know David had a bit of a struggle pronouncing my name correctly, but he's forgiven. I am the coordinator of BirdLife Global Flyways program. So I'm a part of the Cambridge office of BirdLife, but I cover the whole world, anything to do with migratory birds and BirdLife. I have some link to it. So first, a little bit about myself. I am quite a keen bird watcher. This is me in the scary emo, or what is it, emo style pants sitting there. I think here I was about 14 years old, and I was actually already looking at migratory birds. So this is a migration point near Groningen in the north of the Netherlands, and we were quite keen to count the number of birds that were migrating in spring and autumn. I've been trained as a nature conservationist and ecologist. I have a PhD on essentially plants in tropical rainforests. I worked a long time in Cameroon, but since 2004, I joined the BirdLife Partner in the Netherlands, Vogelbescherming Nederland. And since 2016, I run the Global Flyways program. So I have 3 parts of my talk, which is, it's all about migratory birds. First, I want to introduce a little bit the wonders of migration, the things that excite me about migratory birds. And the second part is the sort of the harsh part, the bit you always get when you listen to a conservationist. It's where things go wrong. But I hope I can emphasize the third part, which is about the successes we're making to conserve migratory birds. There will be a lot of emphasis on bird life, that's logic, but we can only do this work because we're being a part of a much larger conservation community, and we also work with many other supporters, including governments and companies. So a little bit about migration. So the proper definition of a migratory bird is that if it's on a regular basis, a large part of its population migrates between countries. And there's a wide range of migratory birds, and they're all very colorful. This is a slide that National Geographic produced with a lot of help of BirdLife scientists to show some examples of bird migration. So the essence is birds breed somewhere else than where they winter. That's a migratory bird. A few of the big examples of migratory birds are, I will highlight here. So one is just about the sheer distances and the endurance of migratory birds. So this is a bar-tailed godwit that flew from Alaska all the way to New Zealand in 11 days without touching the ground. So it covered a distance of 12,200 kilometers without stopping. So the 2 things that a bird like the bar-tailed godwit needs to do before it takes off. It has this incredible transformation of its body. So its intestines get much smaller. It puts on a lot of weight and it invests in its muscles. So everything he needs during the migration, during the flight, it gets bigger, whereas the things they don't need, like for feeding, get smaller. So after 11 days, the bird arrived in Auckland, very close to a wetland, but still then it can't directly start eating because its intestines are still so small. So even though there's an abundance of food there, it still have to wait for a few hours, sometimes days, before it can start feeding. So this is just a sheer, the thought of it. This is where people will need several airplanes to travel, and this bird does it all by himself. Another, what I think is a great migration, is the ruby-throated hummingbird. This is a bird that breeds in the southern part of Canada and the northern part of the United States. It migrates to Central America. That's not a huge distance in terms of migratory birds, but still considerable. But the fascinating thing is this is a hummingbird, so they have a really rapid wing speed and they need a sort of constant feeding. Still, the birds that go back from Central America to the United States and Canada, they cross the Gulf of Mexico. So that's an 800-kilometer stretch where there's definitely no flowers and not even many insects that these birds can feed on. And it's estimated that during this journey that can take up to 20 hours, the bird has to do 4.5 million wing beats. If it doesn't, it drowns. So this is just a very small bird, but still a great migrator. So there's another type of migration. So the Bartel godwit and the hummingbird, they all sort of rely on flying power. There's a group of birds, I used to call them lazy, but I've been corrected by people working on vulture. They call them clever. These birds that use pockets of hot air to go up and then glide to the next pocket of hot air. So these soaring birds like pelicans and the storks you see in the photo, they are experts in that. So many raptors are. And because the geography of the land sort of dictates where these pockets of hot air occur, these soaring birds, as we call them, have quite predictable migration routes. So they avoid generally open water, and because there's just little thermals there. So these are the places you can see them. Recently, also this is research done by the Bulgarian BirdLife partner, and it shows the migration of satellite-tagged Egyptian vultures. So they, of course, they're Bulgarian, so they tagged them in Bulgaria, and they wanted to know where they go because the population in Bulgaria is declining. And the thought was that there's a part of the problem is in Bulgaria, but the rest of it is along the flyway. So thanks to this satellite-tagged birds, we now know what juvenile birds do, where they stay, and then as they become adult, when they return, and again, what migration routes they take. Nature Conservation Egypt noticed that there's a bottleneck where many Egyptian vultures pass at the top end of the Red Sea, so in the Suez Canal, or close to the Suez Canal. And they set up this spring, they set up a 6-week count, and they counted over 350,000 migratory birds belonging to 28 species. I joined them for a little while, and it was just totally spectacular because the photo, you see Hytham on the ground from Nature Conservation Egypt, supported by one of the team of the Bulgarian BirdLife partner. And they're looking up, but there's another side where you actually look down. So you see the migrating birds at eye level or even lower. And then the sheer amount of steppe buzzards that pass, the white storks, black kites, steppe eagle, lesser spotted eagle, they're all incredible. And especially steppe eagle, because it's an endangered species. And the number of birds passing by Galala, as this point is called, is about 25 to 32% of the global population. So this is an excellent way to have some sense of how many birds there are, because these birds breed in the vast steppe areas in Russia. So this is an exciting development, and this is something Nature Conservation Egypt will be taking forward in the next years. And if you ever have the opportunity, I would recommend joining them forward. So I've been talking about how migration fascinates me by the sheer distance, the sheer height, the small birds, etc., the adaptations. But there's also a way that actually migratory birds bring a bit of Africa to my local patch. So this is the Eurasian marsh warbler, which is an excellent imitator of song. And it turns out that on average, each male bird incorporates imitations of at least 75 different species. And many of them are African species. The birds seem to be learning those songs while they're in their first year in Africa, before returning for their first breeding cycle in Northern Europe. So they learn the songs. You can hear hornbills and species of African dove, etc., in their song. So it's a song from Africa while you're sitting in the cold Netherlands. I think that's a fascinating fact. Okay, so migratory birds tend to fly from north to south and back again. Sometimes they fly from south to north and back again, but generally we have the idea they go up and down. And so we have in total 9 different global flyways. We have in the African Eurasian flyway, the bit that connects Europe, Middle East, and Africa. We have 3 of them. So it's the East Atlantic Flyway, the Black Sea Mediterranean Flyway, and the Central Asian Flyway. The West Asian, East African Flyway. So those 3 together form the African Eurasian Flyway. Then there's the Central Asian Flyway, which is the shortest of all flyways. It's also the one that we know the least about. Then we have the East Asian Oscillation Flyway, which is a very long one. And then we have the Central Pacific Flyway. That's a flyway especially for seabirds. And then again, we have 3 in the Americas. So the Pacific Americas Flyway, the Mid-Continental Flyway, and the Atlantic Americas Flyway. So those flyways are sort of the way we think about migratory birds, but it's a human construct. So there are many birds that do it slightly different. This gives a good general idea, but it's not like it's sort of, it's a must. So for example, here's the bird in Beijing. They satellite tagged swifts in the Imperial Palace in Beijing, and that bird flew all the way to South Africa. So that's sort of covering 3 different flyways by itself. Then there's another one, even more crazy. This is a redneck phalarope that was satellite tagged in Shetlands in the north of the United Kingdom, and it flew all the way. It's scratched Greenland, went down along the Atlantic coast of Americas, and then crossed the Caribbean to winter in front of Ecuador. So this is a bird that actually winters. It's a wader, but it winters while swimming at sea. So these are just examples that not every bird behaves as the sort of traditional flyway concepts that we have. Still, the flyway concepts are very useful because it's a way for people to reach agreements on, for instance. So government collaborate along flyways because it makes sense. Especially water birds tend to behave properly according to flyway. But please note it's a human construct and there are many exceptions, which makes it wonderful, of course, and fascinating. Okay. This is the horrible bit. This is to explain to you why migratory birds are not doing so well. So migration overall in evolutionary terms is a successful strategy. Otherwise migratory birds wouldn't exist. But increasingly the changes happening along flyways are so intense and so rapid that many migratory birds are in decline. Just some facts. So 17% of all migratory bird species are currently at risk. 2 are already extinct, which is, of course, the famous passenger pigeon and the Labrador duck. In addition, there are 26 globally threatened. So globally threatened according to the Red List. BirdLife is the curator of the IUCN Red List for birds. 113 are vulnerable. Worse are the 60 that are endangered, and then 33 are critically endangered. So among the critically endangered, there's some really enigmatic species like sociable lapwing, yellow-breasted bunting, and especially spoon-billed sandpiper. There are also a few species for which I think we're close at deciding that they've gone extinct. Think about Eskimo curlew and slenderbill curlew. So that's not the whole story, because these are the birds that are globally threatened. They already fulfill the criteria of these threat categories. But there's also a whole group of species that are in decline. So looking at the overall direction of the global population trend, you see that 40% of the birds are declining. And that makes, and as further assessment means that 115 species are near threatened. So that makes the total of birds that we should be really worried about 321 out of the total of 1,930 migratory species. And that's quite a lot. So 70% is quite a lot. And I mentioned all the critically endangered and the vulnerable species, but there are also many common species that are migratory, and like swallows, for instance, and swifts. And it would be a total shame if we lose them. Those were numbers of birds. I wanted to say in the previous slide already that there are, of course, differences between flyways. So some flyways are slightly better than other flyways. Talking in number of birds, it gets more complicated. A recent study in Northern America has shown that alone in Northern America, about 3 billion birds have gone in the last 50 years. So that's an incredible amount of birds that just vanished from the landscape. And many of them are resident birds, but also a large part of them are migratory birds. So if you look at the different groups of birds, you see that a lot of them include migratory birds. For instance, the shorebirds in North America are nearly all migratory. And the problems are not just in North America. It can also be that along the flyway there are problems, which are then reflected in the breeding populations in North America. So that's just a depressing number of things. So the main threats to migratory birds are the overall intensification of agriculture, leading to degradation of natural open habitats. There's a lot of loss and degradation of wetlands, especially coastal wetlands are really under pressure. There's hunting and poisoning for many reasons, some of them for sport, some of them for food, but it can lead to serious pressure on birds. Give the example, the most widespread migratory bird ever was the passenger pigeon. It's now extinct just because of hunting. And then finally, there's the risk of electrocution and collision with energy infrastructure. And this is becoming increasingly a problem, of course, because we need to switch to more renewable energy, and that comes with many more wind farms and associated power lines. So just to be clear, I'm not against renewable energies. I just want to make sure that they're put up in the right places and in the right designs. And overarching everything is climate change. So climate change does not just lead to changes in one particular site. It also affects the way birds migrate. So it might be that there are more storms, or there might be just changes in weather patterns in a site when you arrive. But there's another thing that happens, is a sort of mismatch. So they get cues, these birds, to leave the wintering site to head for the breeding grounds. But this cue is not necessarily linked to something that is adapted to climate change. So it may be they'll be leaving on a cue for day length, for instance, and then arrive in the breeding grounds to find that the peak in insects they need to feed their chicks on has already passed. So that's sort of another. And just to say that migratory birds, as they travel from one side to the other, they can encounter many of these threats. So it's not just one single thing, it's accumulation of threats. As you understand, that's sort of why migratory birds are not doing so well. However, that was the horrible bit of the presentation. I will now move to a slightly more upbeat, happy faces part of the presentation. So these are people working along the East Atlantic flyway to keep migratory birds safe. So you will see they're all friendly faces, and they're just waiting to look after the migratory birds that they share. So they are part of the BirdLife Partnership. So for those who don't know it, BirdLife International, the BirdLife Partnership is a collaboration of around 120 national conservation organizations. All national organizations are independent. They do their own work. They have their own membership. But jointly, we conduct a number of strategic programs together. One of them is the Flyways program. So in essence, what the Flyway program does, it sort of unites the BirdLife partners along flyways to look after migratory birds. So that's sort of what we do. Make sure that all these people work with each other. That's my role at the Secretariat, with my team, of course, not just me. Okay, something else to emphasize is the way we work is mutually reinforcing. So we work internationally in collaboration, for instance, with multi-environmental agreements like the Convention on Migratory Species. So international level, there's sort of action plans and things we want to implement and promises the governments make that we keep them accountable to. And then there's a national level policy and regulations and budgets that go to nature conservation, the designation of national parks, etc. And then it's on the ground work, the place where actually birds are being saved. And while international collaboration by itself, and nor even national policy and regulation, do not save birds, it is important that those two layers, those scales are involved, because the on-the-ground conservation action can only be sustainable if it's supported and reinforced by national policy and regulations, both at national level and through international collaboration. So it's important for us all to work on these different levels. And that's one of the powers of BirdLife, because we are well represented along flyways. We are capable to work on all the different scales, from local to global and back to local. Okay, I'm going to talk about 3 successes. And there are many more, and I've probably heard the feelings of a few of my colleagues that I didn't select their talk. But the first of them is the Amur falcon. So the Amur falcon breeds in the north and the southeast of Russia and northeast China. And then nearly the whole population passes through Nagaland in India and then migrates further down to southern Africa. Yet again, one of those species that doesn't follow the proper flyways. But okay. So these birds are sort of in Europe, we have the red-footed falcon, which is a sort of very closely related species. And in Nagaland, they gather in enormous amounts. And the reason is that they're flooded areas, they're artificially flooded areas, and there are a lot of dragonflies. So the birds come here and there seem to be more and more birds that tend to rely on Nagaland area. And if you thought that the picture on the right was already impressive amount of Amur falcons, I'll give you another photo. So this is just to give you an idea of how many birds are there. They're literally like mosquitoes. So nearly the whole population passes through Nagaland, and that has attracted the attention of people going out to kill them. So it was estimated in 2012 that about 100,000 falcons, that's a conservative estimate, were killed every year, only in autumn migration. And these birds are kept alive so that it can be sold on the market. So it's quite a horrible thing. From the perspective of the local population, I must say that there's reason for it. This is a very, it's a least developed region. And there have been changes. So the artificial lake has sort of taken away the farmlands of the people that the people relied on for their proteins. So they turn to hunting, which has a long tradition in this area. So I don't want to blame anyone, but still you can see, if you, in the back of your mind is a story of the passenger pigeon. This is not what you want, especially if it's increasing, if the techniques to catch birds are getting more sophisticated, the markets that are being fed by these this hunting increasing. So that will be likely the end of the Amur falcon if there were not proper action taken. So what happened is Conservation India was the first, was a conservation organization in India who first started, who alerted the world to this problem. And then BNHS stepped in with support from a lot of BirdLife partners and other organizations in India and worldwide. There was serious awareness and advocacy campaigns going on, both at local level, at national level, and international level. BNHS started creating youth eco clubs to raise awareness in the villages and create some sense of pride with the youth about the incredible spectacle of the Amur falcon migration. Serious investments were made in developing ecotourism, so homesteads for people to come and visit and watch the spectacle. And they really invested in making it something of a community, bringing the community together and the pride. So there were football tournaments and falcon festivals. There was already a law in place that hunting in principle of all wild animals was forbidden. However, that was not really enforced, and through the advocacy, finally, in collaboration with the local communities, it was decided that the hunting had to stop. So that's the current situation. There's hardly any hunting left, and definitely not at the scale that was noticed in 2012. But it's very important to stay engaged. So BNHS is quite keen to continue working in this area because we don't want people to revert back to this source of protein because they don't have any other sources of income. So the second success I want to highlight here is for the black-tailed godwit, and I must say for other waders in the East Atlantic flyway. So the northwestern European population of black-tailed godwit is in steep decline. So in the Netherlands, it's our national bird, but still we don't manage to keep the population going. And the problem essentially is intensive agriculture and all the associated problems with that. Lower groundwater levels, less insects, etc., etc. Also in the wintering ground, there's land use change going on, wetlands degradation, climate change, the whole thing. So the success I'm talking about is not for the black-tailed godwit by itself, but it is for the plans of the government of India to convert a part of the Tagus estuary into an airport. So Lisbon Lisbon needs a new airport, and they had planned this as the most suitable site in the stopover site that nearly all northwestern European black-tailed godwits use in their spring migration. So this is the final stop they have to get fat and ready for breeding. So if this airport would be developed, that would be the end of it, and all the investment made in the Netherlands and elsewhere would have been for nothing. So SPEA, the BirdLife partner in Portugal, led the national action, and in collaboration with the BirdLife partners along the flyway, international action was taken as well. So one of them was an international campaign to raise awareness, to have people voice out their concerns, both sort of a public level, but also governments reach out to the government of Portugal, saying that this was a bad plan. This pressure on the government is really good. However, it needs more. So there was some serious science behind it. The RSPB supported, and Vogelbescherming Nederland, VBN as well, discovering where exactly do the birds come from when they use the Tagus estuary. And it was the ringing data showed that there are 30 plus countries linked to the Tagus estuary. So their birds visit the Tagus estuary. And that's sort of 342 important bird areas along the flyway, total covering more than 60 million hectares. And this science then led to raising the issue with international conventions. For instance, a case was made for the Barend Convention, and court cases were taken in Portugal, just using all the tools we have in the conservation toolkit to convince the government of Portugal that it was a bad idea. And the latest development is, SPEA informed me at the BirdLife World Congress, that the government is now sort of making, while keeping, saving their faces, making movements to identify alternative locations for the airport. And this study will take a year, so it will be ready by the end of 2023, which is all slowing down the whole process. So it feels like we may have saved the Tegus estuary. And the third and last example I want to give of a success is the buff-breasted sandpiper. Again, a wader, but this buff-breasted sandpiper is representing also the grassland birds along the, especially the mid-continental flyway in the Americas. It's a long-distance migrant, and the population is decreasing. But before I go into the horrible bit, just a little bit of fun fact. So this buff-breasted sandpiper has the incredible display, and displays when males try to attract females, some cases the other way around, but in buff-breasted sandpiper, it's the male, they sit at leg sites, which means there are a number of males coming together, and females visit and look for the most attractive partner. And the way for the male buff-breasted sandpiper to impress a female is by showing its armpit. And so first it shows its left armpit, and then it shows its right armpit, and then really go crazy, you show both your armpits. And that's sort of the most convincing move a buff-breasted sandpiper can make. Okay, back to serious business. So the buff-breasted sandpiper, so the main wintering site is the southern cone grasslands in Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Argentina. And here's a whole agricultural system change going on. So a lot of these sort of natural, low intensity grazing grasslands are being transformed in very intensive soybean and other intensive crops. So that's sort of a total loss of all the biodiversity of the grasslands. So the BirdLife partners in these countries have created the Southern Cone Grassland Alliance. And that alliance works with ranchers to increase both the economic and the biodiversity benefits of these grasslands. So just making them a viable business option for the farmers, while at the same time conserving the characteristic biodiversity, including the buff-breasted sandpiper and a number of other migratory birds in the area. So currently there's 680,000 hectares of nature-friendly managed grasslands, and it's still increasing. Monitoring data shows that the number of birds and biodiversity in general is maintained and even increased through the new type of management. And increasingly, people are looking at these grasslands also as a carbon stock. So that may be another way for farmers to engage in this and make it more profitable while still maintaining the crucial habitat for many migratory birds. Also in Bolivia, work is being done for the buff-breasted sandpiper. So here Ammonia, the BirdLife partner in Bolivia, manages the Barba Azul Nature Reserve. They do it for the Barba Azul, which is one of the macaws, but there's also extensive grasslands there. And it's an important stopover site for buff-breasted sandpiper. So what they do, they adapt, similar to the Southern Cone, a grazing, a cattle ranching system that allows these buff-breasted sandpipers, they really like the short grass or the intermediate grass at certain times. So they have cattle ranching going on there, and they also control fire, or manage the fire frequency and intensity. And so that keeps the habitat perfect for the buff-breasted sandpiper. And they also, as a source of income, they use the cattle, but also ecotourism to maintain the site. As this is a reserve owned and managed by Ammonia, this site is secured, and they're looking at expanding. So those were three stories which give you a flavor of what BirdLife Partnership does and what the BirdLife partners do to save migratory birds. like I said, there are many other links, many other stories to be told. And I just realized I didn't include one on energy, but there's also good stories to tell on energy. Of course, there are many challenges as well. I'm not going to say the world is not on fire. Actually, the world is on fire, and we really need to work hard to save migratory bird for the birds, but also the spectacle and the awe it raises in humans throughout the world. In case you want more information, I'm not sure how we can. I don't think people will be writing this down right now, but maybe David can share later. There are a number of sources of information you could check. So there's recently BirdLife published the states of the world's birds, which you can download at our website. The BirdLife Data Zone also has a lot of information on sites, on migratory birds, on birds in general. We just published Making a Difference Too, which is sort of a snappy overview of the recent conservation successes of BirdLife. And just in case you want to help us save migratory birds, so the first thing I hope everyone does is sign up to your national BirdLife partner and join them in the conservation action. And if you can, donations are very welcome. And with that, I would like to thank you.
Well, we would like to thank you, Barend. That was a very, very fascinating talk, and you know, it's just scratching the surface, as you know, as we all know. But it also raises lots of questions, of course, and I'm hoping that our audience will have some questions later as well. But firstly, I'm just want to say I'm very happy about the Tagus estuary scenario in Portugal, because I was aware that, you know, they were trying to build an airport there. I didn't actually realise that it'd come to that, well, potential that, you know, they're looking elsewhere to do it. I just hope that elsewhere is not another place that's a migratory issue. But I'm going to go and hit the, you know, cut to the chase basically. I was alarmed. I mean, I knew this fact before, but I was alarmed, you know, at the number of birds missing or lost just in North America, nearly 3 billion birds, which makes you think, what is the situation, you know, globally in terms of numbers of birds lost? And in my life, I've noticed, you know, numbers of birds actually decreasing. When you go to migratory hotspots in the UK, for example, back in the day, there used to be regular falls of hundreds of birds, sometimes thousands, and you'd hear stories about the past in the 60s when they were littered regularly with birds, and now that's a real thing of the past. There's very few occasions when you get large numbers like that. So, in your honest opinion, Barend, what do you think what is a long-term sort of view for migratory birds? Do you think they have a chance?
We must keep hope, always. There's no way around it. The world is on fire, I see it, and sort of migratory birds move between places, so that's an added challenge, because the best they can do is the quality of the weakest link. Migratory birds have gone through bottlenecks before. It's estimated that the red knot at some point was a population of merely a few thousand birds, and then it sort of radiated again and increased. So I think it's all about creating space for nature. I wouldn't say, yeah, I don't like the doom and gloom side of things. We need to keep hope. They're incredible people. I see many more people getting aware about what's happening in the world. I just hope we're going to get there. I can't do otherwise. I'm doing my best, and many people with me, and yeah, we might lose a few. I think for birds like slender-billed curlew, Eskimo curlew, I don't think we're ever going to find them again. But you know, I think if you look at, for instance, spoon-billed sandpiper, that's one of the critically endangered species on the East Asian Australasian flyway. And their numbers are currently on the increase, or at least the decline has stopped. And that's a very small bird traveling one of the longest migration routes, and we are managing it. So it's a combination of saving sites in China and stopping hunting in Bangladesh and head starting programs in Russia. And it's that combination. And if I see the effort of so many people, I must believe it. The birds are too dear to me to say, no, let's do something else. So
Yeah.
I'm sticking to it. Sorry, David.
No, don't be sorry, because I think every conservationist on the planet feels the same way about you, like you do about this, should I say? Because you have to keep hoping, you have to keep pushing and pushing. We'll talk about renewable energy in a minute, but I just want to ask you just on this subject a little bit, get a bit more. Convincing governments. You know, I'm sitting here. Well, actually, I'm in Spain, but normally I'm sitting in. Well, sometimes I'm sitting in the UK, and I look around me and I look at the people governing, and there seems to be very little interest in conservation other than lip service. Um, and I look around the world, and I'm not sure what the situation is like elsewhere. I mean, a couple of nights ago we had someone talking about birding in China, and he was saying that things have improved and there's laws now stopping people hunting, and the public opinion is if someone's seen to be hunting ducks, for example, they're told you can't be doing that. In your experience, do you think that governments are kind of understanding the situation? Do you think that they look at conservation, and especially like migratory birds, for example, and think beyond the fact that, oh, we just need to protect these birds? Do they make the link and realize that actually without this ecosystem we're going to have problems? Do they look at it that way, or is it just a short-term kind of, yeah, okay, we won't build in that place to keep the birds coming? Do you understand? I mean, what's your view in terms of governments around the world?
Yeah, so my take on it is that government's interests are generally dictated by the cycle of the politics. So that's why civil society is so important. So it's civil society and scientists that keep banging on about the things that need to be protected and keeping the governments on their toes. So international agreement is a very interesting mechanism, because governments tend to come together. Currently, they're in Sharm el-Sheikh. In October 2023, they'll come together on the Convention on Migratory Species, and they make all kinds of promises. It's the role of civil society to, when the government agencies come back, to actually keep them on their toes to make it happen. So that's where we as BirdLife work on the different levels. It's not just sitting in the large meetings, but also making sure that the decisions from those meetings are being fed by the insights of science and the BirdLife part of the conservation community, but also that how is that then back translated into national and local action. So it will not run by itself. We cannot think like governments will get it and then we can lay back and continue birding as we all would love to do. And that's the role of civil society. I don't work for a government. I decided to work for civil society because that gives you that flexibility to stick. But still, there's a give and take. So. And then the other point I want to make, I'm not sure who is on the call that may see this from government. There are many, many good people inside government. So it's not just not the outcome. There are many people that are truly dedicated to nature conservation, that are very knowledgeable, and we need to help them to find the ways. They know how the governments work. They know how to navigate the ministries and the agencies, and we need to support them. So it's not one big thing. The government doesn't exist. Inside the government are people, and you need to know how to play the game. Once again, the BirdLife Partnership, we have BirdLife partners in countries. So we understand in each country the way the culture of the people, the way the ministries work, who to talk to, who, etc. What are the routes to success? So it's not a blanket treatment, but yeah. I hope that answers the
Yeah,
question.
well, and also the fact that you do so much great work, i.e., all the BirdLife partners on the ground, because you're working from the ground up as well, which is important because it comes from both ends. And you're working from the top end with the government, but also they are noticing things happening on the ground too, because you're helping people to be more considerate with the environment. Um, which leads me on to renewable energy. On paper, amazing, brilliant. Let's get involved in it. Because obviously it's better than fossil fuels. But as you mentioned, there's a payback, and with things like wind farms and solar farms, there's actually problems with that. Can you quickly just highlight what the problems are? Because, for example, I'm in Spain, and I know, for example, in Tarifa, in southern Spain, just before you hit Africa, there's loads of wind farms there. Um, but they've actually worked out a system whereby if there's going to be heavy migration, those wind farms are turned off. But I don't think that happens everywhere, does it?
Yeah, it happens in more places. So also in Egypt, they have this system called shutdown on demand. So that means that people are standing throughout the two migration season, they're standing inside the wind farms. And the ones there's, for instance, a threatened bird or more than 10 birds in a flock, then they shut down the turbines that are closest to them. So it does happen. The thing is that it's often done. So in Spain, for instance, it's probably because the government is quite strict on it. In Egypt, it's more like the funding agencies insist on that kind of system in place. So that's also, it's also important to talk to the international financial institutions and donors that support this kind of development. But still, we need to, the problems of climate change are going to be much, much bigger. So the way we are operating is our first goal is to work upstream, making sure that power lines and wind farms are not placed in areas where they are a high risk to migratory birds. So we developed, previously it was called the energy sensitivity mapping tool. We recently launched a new version, it's called AviStep. If anyone's interested, you can find it on, it's free, you can find it online. And it's a system that sort of explains what area, so you can select an area on the map and show if that, what are the risk associated if you would do a certain development. It can be offshore wind farm, on land wind farms, it can be solar, and it sort of shows. So that the ideas, and it's combined with where there's, for instance, enough wind to actually do wind farms. So you get a combination. So increasingly, banks like the Asia Development Banks are looking into places. So if there's a proposal to develop a wind farm, they will look at this kind of tools to see if that site is a risk, because the Asia Development Bank, like all other regional development banks, they also have committed to having less impact on biodiversity. So that's sort of way to go. So first, getting new renewable energy in the right places is the first step to go. And then we'll also need to look into how we're going to make the existing power lines and wind farms more bird friendly. So there are all kinds of ways to deter birds. And in some cases, power lines go underground, because in that area it's the risk is so high that the mortality will remain high whatever you do. So yeah, there are quite a few of those developments going on. But yeah, it's a huge problem. But yet again, if we don't switch to a different type of fossil fuels, the problems will be much, much bigger also for migratory birds.
Yeah, because I was hearing about wind farms, and there was something I read about having one of the propellers painted black, which
Yeah.
makes perhaps easier for the bird to notice. But solar farms come with their own problems as well, because I was shocked. In Seville, there's this massive, tall structure, really high, and at the top of it, there's some kind of mirror system that kind of collects the heat. and you can see it from miles away. It's a really bright light, and I think there's some kind of energy that's collected by these things up on top of this tower. But the problem is that birds fly towards it, and just get zapped because the heat apparently is like probably as hot as the sun there. Just get zapped, and that's that. And I would imagine that solar farms, there's lots more solar farms now, and they're taking up a lot of land, and there's nothing much that can actually even grow underneath them. So I'm not even sure how do we get around that.
Yeah, I must confess I'm not really an expert on solar farms, but I do know of course, they cause displacement. I also hear that in some areas where there's a lot of sun, actually, it's they use a lot of water to clean the solar system. But again, here it's just making sure that they're placed in the places where they have the least impact. So yeah, but I didn't know about this zapping of migratory birds. I will look into that.
Yeah, well, as I said, I learned that recently, and I think we're beginning to learn more about this kind of stuff anyway. But on the positive side, migration is an amazing phenomenon, and when you touched on the physiological changes that birds go through, I mean, the bar-tailed godwit flying for 11 days non-stop, and then when landing, not even having, not being able to feed until their intestines and stomach, grow back to what they should be. It's just phenomenal. And for me, I get excited during this period of time because I myself become a bit migratory in terms, at least, I'm sort of, I remember when I used to work in an office, I'd be standing by the window, looking out the window at this time of year, during the spring or autumn, because I'm wanting to be out there sort of on migration. I mean, we've got more questions, by the way, and for those watching now, in the future, or even now, in fact, not now because you're here now, but in the future, we're going to have a Q&A in a minute, and basically that is a benefit if you are a member of the Urban Bird of World community. So if you're not a member of the Urban Bird of World community, which is on theurbanbirdofworld.com, then you won't see what's coming next. There's a few more questions, but you will just see this bit. But I think I need to ask you a couple of really abstract questions to close off today. If you could be anywhere on this planet right now, where would you be right now?
From what perspective?
I thought you'd ask those questions. From any perspective,
So if I have to say, I'm really happy to be at home. So it's not just because my girlfriend is on the line, but running a global program for bird life, it is quite a lot of travel. In the last 7 weeks, I've been away from home for 6 weeks. So I'm actually quite glad to be home and feel the changes of seasons. So the downside of traveling is you see many spectacular places, you meet many spectacular people, but you tend to lose a little sense of place. So I have my local patches here in the Netherlands around my garden, of course, and a wetland and a forest area where I always go back to just to get a sense of the seasons, because just like migratory birds, I like these changes, but you only see the changes because you're going to the same place. Otherwise, it's just another bird somewhere else. So yeah, I'm especially today, I would say I'm good where I am.
Good. And what is your favorite bird?
Yeah, so that tends to vary. So I love reading up on birds. So I recently had a book, I gave it away, so I don't know where it is, but it's called Birdways. It's somebody a lady who's describing behavior of birds and insights in it. And more we're getting to understand that bird culture is something real. These birds sing, but they actually are saying something to each other. So the best story I read there was about the great Ani of Southern America. These are birds that have communal breeding. So actually they put four pairs, put their eggs in one nest. And then they decide among themselves who will breed when and who will feed the chicks when, etc., and who will be on the lookout. And the great thing about the great Ani, which by the way is quite an ugly bird, is a few times a day they all come together. So this whole group of 8 to 10 birds, they come together. One stays on the lookout, and the other of them do something like a group hug. So they all point their bills that are in a circle, all looking inwards, and then they start chanting. Wouldn't that be amazing? I saw these ugly birds when I was in Panama. I saw them, and I didn't know they did that. Otherwise, I would have sticked with them for the whole day just to see that moment when they do this group chant. So that's for now is my favorite bird. But ask me next week, and maybe I'll come with a different one.
Well, I never knew that about the Annie. One thing I did know about the Annie is that it's one of the very few birds that actually smell bad in terms of when you smell them. And that's
okay, yeah, but there are quite a lot of birds. So cormorants smell horrible as well. Gannets. Oh my God. Yeah.
Excuse me. Anyway, Zoom is just to let you know that coming up on the 14th of November, we've got AJ Tagala, who's a presenter and writer, and he's talking about the confessions of being a countryside ranger in the UK. On the 21st of November, we've got Amy Jane Beer, and she's talking about her book Flow, which is all about rivers. On the 28th of November, we have Florence Wilkinson, a friend of mine, and she's written a book about urban wildlife in our cities. So we're talking about that. And there's a ton more people. So check out theurbanbirdworld.com, look under the In Conservation With listing, and you can get a free place on these fascinating talks. I mean, we could be talking forever, myself and Barend here, but we're going to have to call it a day here. So Barend, thank you very much for sparing your evening to talk to us. It's been a fascinating talk. And before you actually go, could you just quickly enlighten us in terms of the species behind you?
Yeah. So I guess on top is a Asian darter. And then there on the left and right, the extremes, there is the pygmy cormorant. And then there's one bigger cormorant. I can't see it. It's very small now, but one of the bigger cormorants is Indian cormorant. And I guess the ones that you alluded to is there's a jacana walking underneath the trees. I think it's pheasant-tailed jacana, but I need to check on that.
Yeah,
so there are 4 species of bird, and that's it.
Yeah, well, I gave you the wrong clues, folks. I said 3, but anyway, who got it right? Who had 3 at home? Anyway, Barend, thank you very much for tonight. Really appreciate it. And Zoomers, once again, thank you so much for being here tonight, this afternoon, this morning. Hope to see you again real soon. And don't forget the golden rule: keep looking up.